The missing J.J Macfield in the Island of Memories is a rare and memorable dame. One that tackles a range of mature issues, refusing to shy away from themes of self-harm and gender identity via its clumsy yet genuinely heartfelt narrative. It's an evocative, emotionally charged gem that will stick with me for a long time to come. You play as JJ, a young woman who travels to a remote island with her friend Emily for an intimate camping trip. During the night, JJ awaits to find Emily missing and embarks inland in an attempt to find her. Fairly soon after she begins her search, she is struck by lightning whilst running through an open field. Thanks to the assistance of a moose-headed doctor and a desperation to persist with her search for Emily, JJ finds herself gifted with the ability to regenerate her severed limbs and scorched skin, restoring her to full health within seconds. The Missing is a game designed by Hidetaka Suehiro and his new development team White Owls. For those who are unaware, Swery is a Japanese developer well known within cult circles for creating bizarre, ethereal adventures that bear more than a passing resemblance to the work of acclaimed film and TV director David Lynch. His most well-known title, Deadly Premonition, is one of my favourite games of all time, a third-person action mystery that serves as a hallmark for Swery's distinct approach to video game design. You can find out more about why I love that game, and by extension the world Swery creates, in this video I did back in April. Swery's influence is pervasive throughout The Missing, primarily in its portrayal of the game's more offbeat characters, such as the aforementioned moose-headed doctor who talks in backwards verse.
Sharks didn't minister that. Maybe emerald.
The frequent text message conversations JJ has with her stuffed animal FT, in of itself a direct reference to a returning motif in all of Swery's games, as well as a few sporadic drawn-out discussions about old movies with her college professor, similar to York's driving monologues in Deadly Premonition. Atmospherically, The Missing feels like the Swery game, equal parts suffocatingly creepy, with its twisted imagery and haunting sound design, as it is comical and genuinely sweet. It feels good to be immersed once again in a world that feels so uniquely Swery, even down to its low-poly, drab environments that are arguably now an integral part of his aesthetic. It should be noted, however, that when it comes to Suehiro's trademarked absurdity, The Missing feels muted in comparison to his previous titles. This very much works to the game's benefit, however, and we'll circle back to this a little later. Taking heavy influence from Playdead's duo of narrative-driven puzzle platformers, Limbo and Inside, The Missing sees players running across a 2D plane, solving inventive brain teasers, as well as jumping, climbing, crawling, and swinging their way through the game's various 1950s inspired environments. The twist here is that death is a near impossible outcome to achieve, with hazards such as barbed wire and saw blades slicing JJ's limbs clean off when she runs into them, rather than instigating an instant game over. Instead, self-mutilation is the core mechanic of The Missing, with players having to utilise JJ's inability to die in order to progress. Limbs can be sheared off tactically in order to use them as a counterweight on a seesaw, for example, or can be thrown at objects to knock them down from an unreachable height. It's an innovative concept, one that feels like the natural extension of the mechanics found within the games it borrows so liberally from, even if the gimmick begins to give way to frustration towards the latter half of the game's 5-hour runtime. Using your own limbs to surpass obstacles isn't an idea The Missing may have necessarily invented, but it's certainly the best example of it I've ever seen. It's interesting to note that in Limbo, deaths are brutal, the majority of the horror stemming from the game breaking an understandable taboo every time it depicts its child protagonists, limp body, severed, pierced or crushed. These scenes are easily stomached thanks to the game's cartoonish style. A hand-drawn silhouette against an abstract background isn't, after all, exactly lifelike. The Missing isn't either. JJ's design inspired by Japanese anime, but her more realistic proportions and the naturalistic environments she inhabits makes witnessing her mutilation feel more raw. Whereas Limbo's child remains silent throughout his demise, JJ screams in agony as her flesh rips and severs, whimpers as her bones break and splinter. It's horrible, and it never at any point gets any easier to experience. Good sound design, folks. Yep, it goes a long way. As you might have already guessed, The Missing is a horror game, and it's a creepy one at that. A chilling atmosphere is cultivated via the game's lack of a noticeable soundtrack. The majority of the game played in relative silence, spare the odd backward speaking character.
Is this a dream?
An enemy that plays Jathanabot's music as you approach its hidden location, JJ's screams of anguish, and worst of all, the voice acting.
Whoa, Emily, what exactly are you asking?
Well, it's just, the stars look so pretty.
You're such a romantic.
Which is no good whatsoever. Horror is an effective genre of which to tell a story revolving around mature themes within. After all, horror accommodates the supernatural, allowing storytellers to manifest these themes in a more evocative, primal way that can often result in a lasting impact on an audience. Sometimes people just need to see a fear or a social issue as a literal spooky monster before they can begin to understand its wider impact on a society and by extension, an individual. For the best example I've seen of this in recent years, make sure to watch Jordan Peele's excellent Get Out. It's through the utilisation of this horror narrative technique that The Missing tells its story. If you've stuck with me up to this point, here's your last spoiler warning because I'm not holding back from this point on. The Missing is a story about a young trans woman who, after being fundamentally misunderstood by both her mother and society as a whole, attempts to take her own life while studying at university. It's revealed in one of the later chapters that the whole game takes place within JJ's subconscious as paramedics desperately attempt to revive her. It's a heavy subject matter, one that Dame introduces subtly and I must say with heartfelt care via text message threads slowly given to the player as they work their way through the game and by collecting floating donuts. Video games. These conversations are beautifully realised, with each of JJ's tontats having a distinct personality and feeling very much like characters that are integral to the plot, despite you never interacting past these textual echoes from the past. They are fundamental in making the player warm to JJ, allowing us to witness who she is on a more intimate human level as she playfully banters with friends and reveals her aspirations to a college professor who confides in her in equal measure. As the game progresses, JJ's underlying conflict with being unable to express who she truly is revealed primarily via messages with her mother, a close-minded conservative who, during one particularly gut-wrenching moment, admits that she has been reading JJ's diary while she is away at university and refers to her as Sith and in need of curing. It's a hard-hitting moment, amplified by the absence of any kind of soundtrack and the cold, impersonal nature of text messaging. The persistent use of the word normal leaves a bitter taste. This internal conflict forms the backbone of the game, and The Missing is a tonally cohesive experience for the most part as a result. The game's environments, all of which take influence from 1950s America, are a clever touch. The attitudes towards sexuality and gender from the society which this imagery originates, comparable to those of both JJ's mother and, sadly, parts of modern day society too. It is a cold, unwelcoming island that does not care much for JJ's presence within it. Most enemies are recognisably obvious manifestations of JJ's inner demons too. A strikingly tall woman who hunts down JJ wielding a sharp blade with the intent of slicing her to pieces is an obvious analogue for her suicidal mindset, but other enemies are far more open to interpretation. These huge, terrifying wind-up Munty toys, for example, could perhaps be a play on the old turn of phrase the organ grinder, not the Munty, meaning simply that one wishes to speak to the boss rather than the subordinate, the origin of which stems back to historical street performers who would play the organ whilst a Munty danced to their tune. The focus would be on the Munty, but the one in control was the organ grinder. In the game, it could be considered that the organ grinder, in this case, is JJ's mother, forcing her to live a lie, explaining why the Munties who clash their symbols onto JJ, mandling her body and breaking her bones in the process, are so robotic in nature. Finally, these babies who hide in the shadows ready to pop out and tear JJ to pieces with their blade-wielding mechanical arms are, I'm not sure, creepy for creepy's sake perhaps. There's a lot here to unpack, despite the game's minimalist and low-fidelity presentation. Its muted absurdity compared to other titles in the Sweryverse goes a long way to highlight its core theme of the difficulties queer trans people, and to a lesser extent, revealed via messages towards the end of the game with Emily, asexuals, have to go through in their lives. Unlike in his other games, Swery manages to tash each thematic chet he writes here, except okay, this is where I have to leave things a little open-ended, because right, so let's go back to the game's central mechanic, which, in light of The Missing's core theme, becomes somewhat troubling. Once you understand that JJ is a trans woman who has attempted to take her own life, the premise of self-mutilation and the emphasis it places on her suffering becomes... I'm not the right person to comment on the way The Missing attempts to symbolise these impossibly large and complicated struggles. It feels too gratuitous to be as simple as a metaphor for self-harm, and I would lean instead more towards it representing how living a life of lies in a body you struggle to identify with can feel tortuous and painful, but again, it's complicated. I'm not the right person to have this discussion. I would love, however, to hear from my friends in the trans community on their thoughts regarding this element of the game. There's also a depiction of suicide towards the end that made me feel quite uneasy. A cheap narrative beat that doesn't really carry any weight, especially when compared to the rest of the game, which exceeds in telling a compelling story in a far more discreet and less exploitative way. The final gameplay segment also feels a bit on the nose and a little derivative too, but the last scene is a powerful, loving, happy ending for a character The Missing genuinely makes you care for. It is, at its conclusion, a moving sequence that sees JJ and Emily reunited. JJ is safe, and her journey has, in one way or another, helped her accept who she truly is. I'm really glad The Missing exists. It's not perfect, it's clumsy in both its mechanics and narrative design, but it goes a lot further than most games dare to go. It's wonderfully bizarre but not to the point of absurdity. It's heartfelt without being too overbearing. It's inventive although its tone mechanic overstays its welcome. It's a troubled but important theme, and shouldn't be understated that this came from a brand new team. A team whose mantra is as follows: we want to create games for you, the people who like us, games that are bizarre, starry, grotesque and dreamlike, yet also have a strange realism, games that remind you of the past, that are comical and sad yet lovable. These are the kind of games we'll be making. With the missing, White Owls are off to a great start.